Hey everyone, Teacher Chang here today, and we're going to go ahead and talk about converting standard form to vertex form by completing the square. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at our first example here. And that first example asks us to determine that vertex by completing the square. So here we got our equation, y is equal to x squared plus 12x minus 10. And I wrote out these steps here on the right, and we're just going to go ahead and follow these steps in order to help us solve or to get this into that vertex form. So the first thing it says is to isolate the x values. That means we want to get that x squared and that 12x by itself. So I need to get rid of that minus 10. And to get rid of that minus 10, we're going to go ahead and add 10 on both sides. So that's our first step. We're going to add 10 on both sides. And that way the 10's on the right will cancel each other out. And that's now going to give us y plus 10 is now equal to x squared plus 12x. So what we have here on the right is part of our trinomial. We want to go ahead and figure out, well, what is that new c value going to be in order to make it a perfect square trinomial? That's the goal here. So we're going to go ahead and complete the square in order to make that right side a perfect square trinomial. In order to do that, we have to remember our rule for completing the square, and that's going to be b over 2 squared. Well, our b value in this case is that 12. So that means we're going to do 12 divided by 2, and we're going to square it. Well, 12 divided by 2 is 6, and 6 squared is 36. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that 36, and we're going to add it to both sides. What we do on one side, we have to do to the other. So I'm going to add it to both sides. And now, if I go ahead and write all this out, we now have y plus 46 is now equal to x squared plus 12x plus 36. Now that trinomial on the right is a perfect square trinomial. And we know it's a perfect square trinomial because we completed the square. That's the whole purpose of completing the square. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that trinomial and we're going to go ahead and write it in factored form. And a quick way to do that is we're just going to square root the first one, which is an x. We'll square root the last term, which is 6. We'll take the sign in the middle, which is a plus sign, and we'll square it. And we can do that only because it's a perfect square trinomial. Now that x plus 6 squared is really our x minus 8 squared in our vertex form. I'm just going to bring down everything else. I'm going to bring down that equal sign and the y plus 46. Now we're almost done. All we got to do is get y by itself. And to get y by itself, we need to go ahead and subtract 46 on both sides. Now the 46's on the left will go ahead and cancel each other out. And now we have our equation, y is equal to x plus 6 squared minus 46. Now this right here is our vertex form. So now we just converted our standard form into vertex form. Now we got to remember that the question is asking us, well, what is the vertex? Well, to figure out what that vertex is, now that it's in vertex form, well, we do know that the h value is going to be negative 6. Remember, it's always going to be the opposite of what it says in that equation. And the k value is negative 46. So that means the vertex for this equation or for this quadratic is going to be at negative 6, negative 46. So that's the vertex of our equation here. All right, so let's go ahead and try another one. Let's take a look at this next one here. And this next one, we have y is equal to x squared plus 6x. And it's slightly different here because, well, in this particular case, the x is already isolated. I don't have anything with that x squared and that 6x. And there's nothing that I need to move around here. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and complete the square. I want to make this right side a perfect square trinomial. So to do that, I'm going to do my b over 2 squared. And the b in this case is at 6. So that means I have 6 divided by 2, and we're going to square it. Well, 6 divided by 2 is 3, and 3 squared is 9. So I'm going to take that 9, and we're going to add that 9 on both sides. So what we do on one side, we do to the other. Okay, so now our equation is going to look like y plus 9 is now equal to x squared plus 6x plus 9. Okay, and once again, we have that perfect square trinomial on the right, so I'm going to go ahead and write it in factored form by squaring the first term, squaring the last term, and then I take the sign in the middle, and we square the entire thing. We go ahead and bring down that y plus 9. And our last step here is to go ahead and subtract 9 on both sides. The 9s on the left will cancel each other out. And that's going to leave us with our equation in vertex form. So y is equal to x plus 3 squared minus 9. So there's our vertex form. Now to get our vertex, remember that h has to be its opposite of what it says in the equation. So h is negative 3, k is equal to negative 9. So our vertex, in this particular case, is going to be located at negative 3, negative 9. All right, let's try another one here. We got y minus x squared is equal to 4x plus 2. Now this is a little bit different because now we got our x's, one on the left and one on the right. So the question is, well, which one do we have to move? Well, one thing that you want to remember is that we want to get our x squared to be positive. So that means I got to get rid of that x squared. I'm going to move that x squared to the right. So I'm going to add x squared on both sides. And I also need to get rid of that 2 on the right. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 2 on both sides. And I could do that at the same time, and that's going to save us some time here. So what happens is that the x squares will cancel each other out, the 2's will cancel each other out, and now we have y minus 2 is now equal to x squared plus 4x. Now you always want to write that x squared first, and that way we could go ahead and figure out, well, what is that new c value? So on the right, we almost have our perfect square trinomial. We just need to figure out what is that c value. Well, again, that c value means we got to do our b over 2 squared. And in this case, b is 4. So that means 4 divided by 2, and we're going to square it. Well, 4 divided by 2 is 2, and 2 squared is 4. So we'll take that 4, we'll add it to both sides. And when we add it to both sides, we now have y plus 2 is now equal to x squared plus 4x plus 4. Now, again, we know we have a perfect square trinomial on the right, so we'll go ahead and write it in factored form. Square root the first term, square root the last term, take the sign in the middle, and we square it. We'll bring down the y plus 2. And then we just need to get y by itself by subtracting 2 on both sides. And the 2's on the left will cancel each other out, leaving us with y is now equal to x plus 2 squared minus 2. There's our vertex form. Now to get our h and our k values, remember h is always the opposite. So h is negative 2. K happens to be negative 2 as well. So we now know that the vertex in this particular case is going to be at negative 2, negative 2. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. But if we take a look at these types of problems, it's slightly different. And the reason why it's different is because we now have an a value that's not equal to 1, meaning that we have a number in front of that x squared that is not a 1. Now, anytime you have that, the very first thing that you need to do is to get rid of that number. So to get rid of that 2 in front of our x squared, to get rid of this 2, we got to divide it by 2. But we can't just divide that by 2. We got to divide everybody by 2 to be fair. So we're going to divide everybody by 2. And when we divide everybody by 2, we now have y over 2 is now equal to x squared plus 18x plus 85. Okay, so this is kind of like what we had before, but now we got that 2 underneath our y. I don't want you to be afraid of it. Let's just keep doing what we do. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that 85 because that 85 is not going to give me a perfect square. So I'm going to get rid of that 85 by subtracting 85 on both sides. The 85s on the right will cancel each other out, leaving us with y over 2 minus 85 is now equal to x squared plus 18x. Okay, so now I need to complete the square. I need to figure out what goes next to that 18x. So to complete the square, once again, I'm going to do a little bit of scrap work here. I'm going to do b over 2 squared. Well, that b value is 18. So that means 18 divided by 2, and we're going to square it. Well, 18 divided by 2 is 9, and 9 squared is 81. So we're going to add 81 on both sides. I'm going to add 81 here. I'm going to add 81 here. And now our equation is going to look like y over 2, not plus, but minus 4. So I'm going to go back a little bit. So minus 4 is now equal to x squared plus 18x plus 81. And now we got that perfect square trinomial on the right. So now we're going to rewrite that perfect square trinomial in factor form. So we'll square root the first term, square root the last term. We'll take the sign in the middle, and we square it. We'll bring down that y over 2 minus 4. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite that up here because I'm running out of room here. So I'm going to rewrite that. Now we got y over 2 minus 4 is now equal to x plus 9 squared. Okay, we're getting there. I need to get y by itself. So to get y by itself, I'm going to add 4 on both sides. The 4's on the left will cancel each other out, leaving us with y over 2 is now equal to x plus 9 squared plus 4. Now the last thing that we need to do is get rid of that 2. And to get rid of that 2, I got to multiply by 2. And what I do on one side, I do to the other. And that way the 2's on the left will cancel each other out, giving us y. But now I need to take this 2 and I need to distribute it. I got to give it to both of these things here. So I'm going to give it to that x plus 9 squared first. So that's just 2 times x plus 9 squared. And then I have 2 times 4, and well, 2 times 4 is just 8. So now we have our equation in vertex form. We can now see what is the h value. The h is actually negative 9. The k value is 8. So that means the vertex in this particular case is going to be at negative 9, 8. Okay, so let's try one more, make sure we got this. So if we take a look at this last one here, we got 6x squared plus 12x plus y is equal to negative 13. And again, we want to get our x's by itself. And we notice that in front of our x squared, we have that 6. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we're just going to go ahead and get rid of that 6 by dividing by 6. And we got to do it to everybody to be fair. So that way the 6's on will disappear with that x squared. So now we have x squared plus 2x plus y over 6 is equal to negative 13 over 6. And we're just going to leave it in fraction form here. It's easier if you leave it in fraction form. Now, we also need to go ahead and make sure that our x squared and our x is isolated from everything else. So that means I got to get rid of that y over 6. So I'm going to subtract y over 6 on both sides. And that way, the y over 6's on the left will cancel each other out, leaving us with x squared plus 2x is now equal to negative y over 6 minus 13 over 6. Now, you always want to write the variable first, and that's why I put that negative y over 6 on the left. Now, we want to figure out, well, what is that c value going to be? On the left, this time we have to complete our squared. So I need to go ahead and complete that squared. We're going to do b over 2 squared here, and that b value is that 2. So that means 2 over 2 squared. Well, 2 over 2 is 1, and 1 squared is just 1. So we're going to add 1 on both sides. Now, when I add 1 on both sides over here, I'm going to add 6 over 6, because 6 over 6 is still 1, and I want that common denominator, and that way I could add the 2 together. So now, what we have here is I have my perfect square trinomial on the left, so x squared plus 2x plus 1, and then on the right, I have my negative y over 6 minus 7 over 6. Okay, so almost there. Now we want to go ahead and we want to rewrite that perfect square trinomial in factored form. So I'm going to square root the first one, which is x, square root that last one, which is just 1, take the sign in the middle, which is a plus sign, and we square it. Now all of that is still equal to negative y over 6 minus 7 over 6. Okay, we want to get that negative y over, we want to get that y by itself. So I need to get rid of that negative 7 over 6. So to get rid of that negative 7 over 6, I'm going to add 7 over 6 on both sides. And that way the 7 over 6's will cancel each other out. Now I'm going to go ahead and write it up here. So now I got x plus y, or x plus 1, sorry, squared, plus 7 over 6 is now equal to negative y over 6. Now we just need to get rid of that negative sign. We need to get rid of that 6. And I can do that at the same time by multiplying both sides by negative 6. So that way, the negative sign and the 6 will cancel each other out. So the negative signs cancel out, the 6's cancels out. So now we're left with y by itself. And then over here, we're just going to distribute. So I'm going to distribute that negative 6 to that x plus 1 squared. So that's just going to be negative 6 times x plus 1 squared. I'm just going to write it out. And negative 6 times 7 over 6 is just going to give me negative 7. So there's our vertex form. Now, we could go ahead and rewrite this so that the y is first. So y is equal to negative 6 times x plus 1 squared minus 7, if you like. And we can see what our h value is going to be. H is negative 1. K is negative 7. So now we know what our vertex is. Our vertex is going to be at negative 1, negative 7. Okay, so there you have it. That's how you go ahead and convert standard form to vertex form by completing the square. And once we have it in vertex form, you should be able to identify what is that vertex. I hope this helped. If you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and leave a comment. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you give me a like. And we'll see you next time.